Transform Demo! Iyamdman is crazy! Puka.
On January 5th, 2020, I got to ride this Pivot Firebird 29 with the Trust Stout Fork. A very interesting ride. What follows is some interviews and some actual riding so you can see how the fork functions on the trail.
Some may say that this fork is a little strange looking, but some may also say it is ugly. And others, they say it is one of the coolest things they've ever seen. We got to spend 20 minutes on the trails at Los Robles riding it. What follows is a talk about what it is and what it does, and some riding videos. Please enjoy!
And where are these made?
These are made in Taiwan.
Okay.
The company is out of Salt Lake City.
Okay.
And behind the three founding members of this company are three of the biggest names in the cycling industry. One is Dave Weigel, who, when you look at DW Link, those are his initials.
Yep.
The other is Jason Shears, whom I worked with Carbon Wheel Days. He's the starter of Envy. Yep. Third is Hap Seliga, who was one of the three founding members of Competitive Cyclists.
Ah, okay.
So, pretty heavy hitters.
I mean, I remember in like 97 or 98, somebody did something very similar to this, a Swiss company.
That, and you go back far enough, you remember Mad Max, who rode for Mongoose, right?
Yeah.
He rode an app.
So it has a history, you know.
It does. But now we've got modern manufacturing, modern materials.
Yeah.
This isn't solving for brake dive, which all those were trying to do.
Right.
That was their whole story.
Because the geometries were so steep back then that they had to do something about it.
They had to do something. This is more about traction and stability. So the axle path is a J-bend.
Okay.
So when you hit something, the axle's going backwards. And then it goes up. So the wheel tends to track the ground better. That's why I'm having everybody hit the curb before they go out.
Sure.
Because the front wheel whirls up and over. The other thing that happens is the offset of your fork actually changes. It's dynamic. So your stability on this improves as you go through travel, whereas a telescopic fork, your stability goes out the window.
Right.
So those are the two key things that can enhance. I mean, if you think about it, the front end of our bike is where all the control comes from. Right. And right now we've got the back end of the bike working better than the front because of the linkage designs that have come about. Yeah. So it's just taking the linkage and putting it on the front of the bike.
Now let's go for a ride!
The first thing I did was do the curb test, see if the fork was adjusted correctly. I hit the curb at speed and it felt as though I had ridden over nothing.
Since it took about 45 minutes to get one of the demo bikes, I only had about a half hour to ride. And so we started out on the flat trails, and although they were kind of cut up from the recent rains, I had to really look to try to hit the hardest stuff. The bike really floated over pretty much everything. It had 178 millimeter up front, and it had 168 in the back, I think. And that's a lot of travel for fairly flat trails. Since I only had about a half hour to ride, I had to try to find as much as I could to test the fork. But as you can see, even on the flatter trails, the fork really was working and moving. And from the position of riding, it was really a hover fork. It pretty much rode over anything. And on the flats, it was really compliant and, in a sense, not very interesting because it was just working smoothly. You can see even on a climb like this, the fork's really moving even though the terrain isn't that rugged. It's absorbing all the different changes in the terrain. This is a steep climb that's fairly rocky. I was picking a line that I wouldn't normally take on my bike, but since this bike has so much travel, it pretty much would ride over anything. And even the bigger rocks and bumps, you didn't lose that much momentum because the fork, it was so easy to get the fork moving to begin with that it really was very compliant. This is obviously a different view of that climb. As you can see, it's fairly rocky. You can see on some of these rocks, the fork's really moving and absorbing the impact, just allowing you to float over everything. The next section was just a lot of climbing, and I'm not going to bore you on the video with that.
Ride, break, and comments.
So testing out this Pivot Firebird 29 with the new truss fork. Interesting ride so far. This fork absorbs so much. It's only got 178 millimeters of travel, but it's all very usable. You just got to learn to keep the weight on the front of the bike. Heather?
There's about 10 behind me.
All right, well, I'll wait.
Now let's go downhill!
After the picnic area was a turnaround point, and the next section is basically a long downhill section. At this section, there's a few little jumps and there's lots of rain ruts, but I could get the bike up to about 30 miles an hour, so you could really see the fork working at speed. Initially I was doing a lot of standing, but later I was just sitting down and hitting everything as I was seated. The fork really was impressive, and the travel in the rear from this bike, there was no effort here. You didn't even have to really pick a line. You just run over anything. The bike would take it all without much translated to your hands and body. Really interesting sensation. I'd love to have ridden this down steeper sections. But here you can see the fork is doing quite well. Some of the rugged sections. And taking in high-speed impacts very well. On some of these chunkier areas on the high speed, the fork offered such a great level of control. It was really impressive.
Right there.
Near the end of this trail, you can see even at speed there was some pretty big hits. And I was just trying to hit every rain rut I could find. Here's a kind of a trench I hit while seated. You can see it was a pretty big impact, but the fork took it and the bike took it really well. This next section is a kind of a steep, rocky downhill. Not as fast, but it gives you a good indication of how the bike handles rocks and ruts and stuff. It was a piece of cake. I took the hardest line I could find. Then at this point I kind of had to turn around, so this is basically going back the way I just came. A slight little downhill with a rain gully that you hit on this side. Now we're climbing the rocky section that we went down. And again, as you can see, the bike can take all the climbing obstacles really well. Just floated over pretty much everything. You could feel the weight of the bike. It was heavier than what I'm currently riding. but what I'm currently riding only has a 115 millimeter in the rear and 130 up front. This thing had a lot more and basically just floated over everything, even on this really steep pitch. With all the rocks, I can pretty much just ride over anything. I didn't lose momentum, and it didn't feel like the bike was sticking on any of the rocks going up them. At this point, I got to the top and basically took a little rest while I adjusted cameras and gave a little bike review to someone who happened to be there.
Comment and camera change.
You demoing that, or you're, is that yours?
Demoing it. It really makes things boring.
Yeah?
You don't even have to work.
Yeah.
It's like riding a Barca Lounger downhill.
Yeah.
There's no effort. Huh?
Over here.
Face back that way?
Down that way and...
When
Okay.
you get to the bottom, take a left.
Okay.
Let's finish the ride.
This last section was the last chance to try to get in some bigger hits on the fork. This was a kind of a steep, rocky section that I had climbed earlier. And again, the fork just floated over everything. Really interesting response. And then later in the trail, got a little speed and took some ruts, some rough stuff. Did a little, got a little air there. I wasn't able to test the fork on any big jumps or anything, so I don't know how it handles any type of big jump. But as you can see there's a fairly big impact. It looked on the camera bigger than it felt. It really, the fork just absorbs so much. You don't really feel anything in the handlebars. Much easier and much more compliant than a standard fork. Obviously we ended the ride by coming back into the pit area and more conversation.
Boring.
Boring?
Absolutely boring.
That just does it.
It's like riding a Barca Lounger down here.
Yeah.
Don't even need to pick a line.
That becomes the challenge once people they'll email me, I'll follow up with people. Like, dude, I'm just stuffing my front wheel into the gnarliest shit I can
I
find.
just sat in the seat the whole time. I got the bike up to like 30 miles an hour. Very stable. Hit the hardest thing I could find at 30. I didn't even get out of the seat. I mean, I'm used to riding 115 millimeter in the back, right? So the rear did everything. The front, it took everything. I did one drop, which was basically a trench about this deep, about this wide. Completely, I think, compressed the fork or close to it. But I was seated the whole time and did not feel like I was out of control at all.
That's awesome.
Even with my weight, right? That's a pretty big shift of weight forward.
Did you sense what I meant? Did you understand after riding it why I said you don't have to move your weight back?
Yeah, no, I got that.
Yeah.
I actually got it on the climb.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So, and normally, for me on this bike, I'd want to add another centimeter to the stem just to pull the weight a little bit more forward. Because this bike's a little bit shorter than what I'm used to. I usually have my seat back a little bit more as well. But no, it was totally boring. Like, no effort. The climbs were really nice. The fork really worked on the climb, and it worked with this suspension.
Yeah, the message, which goes from 110 to 140, and then the shout, which is this, it goes from 160 to 180.
And why were you saying you don't have to move your body or your hands back?
Your handlebars stay at the same height. Because the suspension is active from the ground up, when you grab the front brake, your handlebars don't change their position. when you ride this, your bike stays very neutral all the time. With a telescopic fork, as I was saying, it doesn't know the difference between it reacting to something at the ground or you getting in front of it, pushing down from above.
They have forks more inverted. Is that?
Now, what the issue is the issue is on this fork, there's only one way to move the axle, and that's straight up and down, right? On this fork, there's this J-bend. You can really feel how it's moving. That was the weirdest part on the climb. I could feel the axle moving forward, right? So that's why I'm like, oh, I need a longer stem with this, right? I just kind of feel it because the fork takes less energy to get the fork moving. That fork takes a lot more energy to get it moving.
You're one of the first people that's come back from a test ride and realized the stiction and the dynamic friction on this is a fraction because of the lever, because of the surface area involved. It takes, to activate this suspension, it takes about 2 psi. The traditional system takes about 20 to make active. So what happens is you've got a lot of, I try to simplify it and talk about kind of like the high points to this, which is just basically better traction and more stability. But you also have much less friction, which makes your suspension much more active. So your tire stays on the ground. I mean, that's really the whole point. Your tire stays on the ground more often. Even if your tire loses traction or loses pressure on the ground, you're losing control.
As far as maintenance,
it's incredible. 250 hours is the recommended.
These are what,
with the damper. But the cool thing is, even when we see stuff come back, at 100 hours on a telescopic design, your suspension fluid has changed color.
Yeah.
It's like the oil in your car. It gets heated through all those cycles and it burns. This, when we take them apart 250 hours, they barely look different from new. So it's almost an arbitrary number even at 250 hours.
You pull the cylinders out from the bottom there?
So you've got, here is a combination air spring damper. That's the eyelet bolt. That's the eyelet bolt. You drop this front link, that bolt, drop that down, and do this and this. Literally 5 minutes, and you've just taken out your whole suspension for that side.
So is it for 27.5 and 29?
Yes.
So it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Same fork for both wheels.
We're not married, like I was saying, is regular suspension, the handling of the bike is really determined by the head angle and then the offset, the distance the axle sits away from the steering axis. This, because the axle is dynamic, it compensates for all that. So it actually, no matter if you stick to our, like I said, if you stick to our recommended axle height or axle to crown height and suspension travels, it's going to be an improvement over your traditional system.
What's the weight on this one, just out of curiosity?
So this one's about the same weight as a Fox 36.
Okay.
Within probably 40 grams. Some people have told me they've weighed it and found it's lighter. When we weighed it, we found it to be slightly...
And what about from crown to axle length? Is the height about the same as a 36, or is it a little bit longer?
It's a little bit longer. It's the same as about a Lyric.
Okay. Okay.
So this actually has a shorter axle to crown than a 170 Lyric.
Okay. And then you also have a shorter version of this fork, which is the 140?
Yeah. It's that one over there called the Message.
Okay.
Which is more the trail fork.
Okay. And that's 140, and that's probably what, about a 34 weight?
Little heavier.
Little heavier?
A little heavier
okay.
than a 34.
Okay.
Yeah.